Lucy had always dreamed of hearing tiny footsteps running through her house. She would picture herself rocking a baby to sleep, teaching a toddler to walk, and braiding a little girl's hair. For 8 long years, she waited for that dream to come true. But sometimes life has different plans. Every morning, Lucy would wake up in her small wooden house and feel the silence around her. The extra bedroom they had painted yellow sat empty, waiting for a child who never came. Her husband, Robert, worked at the town bank, and they had a comfortable life in their quiet neighborhood. But that empty room haunted her every single day. Lucy tried everything she could think of. She visited the town doctor, who just shook his head and said some women weren't meant to be mothers. She prayed every night at church, asking God to bless her with a child. She even tried the strange remedies her neighbor suggested, drinking bitter teas and eating special foods. Nothing worked out at first. Robert was patient with her. He would hold her when she cried and tell her that maybe next month would be different. But as the years passed, something changed in him. The hope in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by disappointment and then by something worse, shame. The women in town started talking. Lucy could feel their eyes on her whenever she walked down the street. At the grocery store, Mrs. Johnson would look at her with pity and say things like, "Still no news, dear?" The question felt like a knife in her heart. Every time church became the hardest place to be. Every Sunday, Lucy would sit in the same pew and watch families with their children. She would see mothers bouncing babies on their laps and fathers proudly watching their kids during the children's choir. The pastor would talk about the blessing of families, and Lucy would feel like she was failing at the most basic thing a woman should be able to do. Her own mother, who had raised 5 children, began to lose patience. During their weekly visits, she would sigh and say, "Lucy, maybe it's time to accept that this isn't meant to be." Her mother would go on about how some women were called to other purposes, but Lucy could hear the disappointment in her voice. The breaking point came during a family gathering at her brother's house. The whole family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, and lots of children running around. Lucy sat quietly in the corner watching everyone else's kids play. Her sister-in-law Catherine was there with her 4 children, and she was pregnant again. Catherine had always been jealous of Lucy's close relationship with Robert and the comfortable life they had. That day she saw her chance to hurt Lucy where it would sting the most. In front of the entire family, Catherine announced loudly, "You know, I think it's time we all stopped pretending. Lucy is never going to have children. She's barren, and it's embarrassing for all of us." The room went silent. Lucy felt her face turn red with shame and anger. She looked around at her family, hoping someone would defend her. But they all just stared at their plates or looked away. Her own mother nodded slowly, as if Catherine had just spoken a difficult truth that everyone had been thinking. Lucy ran from the house, tears streaming down her face. She could hear Catherine's voice behind her saying something about how it was time to face reality. When she got home, she collapsed on her bed and cried harder than she had ever cried before. That night, when Robert came home, Lucy told him what had happened. She hoped he would be angry at Catherine for being so cruel. Instead, he sat down heavily in his chair and said, "Maybe she's right, Lucy. Maybe we need to face facts." Those words hit Lucy like a physical blow. Her own husband was agreeing with the woman who had just humiliated her in front of their entire family. She realized then that Robert had been thinking the same thing for a long time, but had been too afraid to say it. Things got worse after that. Robert started working longer hours at the bank, saying he had important projects to finish. But Lucy knew he was avoiding coming home to their quiet house and his childless wife. When he was home, he would read his newspaper and barely speak to her. The silence between them grew thicker each day. Lucy tried to be a good wife in other ways. She cooked his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, and mended his clothes perfectly. But nothing she did seemed to matter anymore. She could see the disappointment in his eyes whenever he looked at her. The town gossip got worse. Women would stop talking when Lucy approached and give her those fake smiles that hurt more than outright rudeness. The shopkeeper, who used to chat with her about the weather, now just took her money without conversation. Even the children in town seemed to sense something was wrong with her and would stare with curious eyes. One evening, Robert's father came to visit. Lucy served them coffee and then went to the kitchen to give them privacy. But the walls in their small house were thin, and she could hear every word. Robert's father was telling his son that a man needed to think about his future and his family. He said that maybe it was time to consider other options. Lucy stood in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she realized what they were talking about. They were discussing the possibility of Robert leaving her to find a wife who could give him children. She felt sick to her stomach. When Robert's father left, Lucy confronted her husband. "Were you really talking about leaving me?" she asked. Her voice barely above a whisper. Robert couldn't look at her. "Lucy, I'm 35 years old. I want children. I want to carry on the family name. I want to be a father." "But we're married," Lucy said, tears starting to fall. "We made vows." No," Robert said quietly. "But this isn't the life I imagined for us." The next few weeks were agony. Robert became even more distant, and Lucy felt like she was living with a stranger. Her family stopped inviting her to gatherings, and her mother's visits became less frequent. Lucy realized that everyone in her life was slowly pulling away from her. The final blow came on a cold Tuesday morning. Robert sat down at the breakfast table and told her that he had spoken to a lawyer. He wanted a divorce. He said he was sorry, but he couldn't continue living a life without children. He needed to find someone who could give him the family he wanted. Lucy felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Where will I go?" she asked. Robert looked uncomfortable. "I thought maybe you could stay with your mother for a while." But when Lucy went to her mother's house that afternoon, she found out that even that option was closed to her. Her mother stood in the doorway and said, "Lucy, I'm sorry, but I can't have you here. The neighbors are already talking about your situation. I can't have that kind of shame in my house." Lucy stood there, realizing that she had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her family, and her place in the community were all gone. She was 32 years old, and her life felt completely over. That night, Lucy sat in her empty house, surrounded by the few belongings Robert had said she could take. She thought about the yellow room upstairs that would never hold a child's laughter. She thought about all the dreams she had built her life around, dreams that had crumbled into nothing. But somewhere deep inside her, a small voice whispered that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe there was still hope for a different kind of life, even if she couldn't imagine what that might look like. Little did she know that her greatest adventure was just beginning. Lucy sat on the wooden floor of what used to be her home, staring at the single suitcase that now held everything she owned. The divorce papers were final, and Robert had already started packing his things. He avoided looking at her, as if seeing her pain would make everything real again. The house felt different now. The yellow room upstairs had been stripped of its baby furniture, and Robert had sold most of their belongings. Lucy was left with her clothes, a few personal items, and the wedding ring she wasn't sure she should keep wearing. She had exactly $47 to her name. "I'm sorry it came to this," Robert said quietly as he loaded his trunk into a wagon. He was moving in with his parents until he could find a new place. "I hope you understand," Lucy didn't answer. What was there to say? She understood perfectly. In their world, a woman who couldn't have children was seen as broken, and a man who stayed with her was seen as foolish. Robert was choosing the path that would let him hold his head high in town. After Robert left, Lucy spent her first night alone in the empty house. Every sound seemed louder: the wind against the windows, the creaking of the wooden floors, the ticking of the clock that Robert had left behind. She had never felt so completely alone in her entire life. The next morning brought a harsh reality. Check. Lucy needed to find a place to live, and fast. Robert had given her 1 week to move out before the new owners took possession. She walked through town asking about rooms to rent, but everywhere she went, doors closed in her face. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house took one look at her and said, "I don't rent to divorced women. It's not proper for my other tenants." The owner of the small apartment above the bakery said the same thing. Even the widow Henderson, who Lucy had helped during her husband's illness, suddenly found excuses not to rent her spare room. Lucy realized that being divorced was almost worse than being childless. At least before, she had been a respectable married woman. Now she was something shameful, something that decent people wanted to avoid. She felt like she was wearing a scarlet letter that everyone could see. On the third day of her search, Lucy found herself at the train station, not because she had anywhere to go, but because it was the only place where she could sit without people staring at her. She watched families boarding trains, heading to new lives in distant places. Some looked excited, others nervous, but they all had hope in their eyes. That's when she noticed something interesting. Near the ticket window, there was a bulletin board covered with notices. Most were about jobs or items for sale, but some were different. These were personal advertisements from people looking for companionship, and many of them were from men out west looking for wives. Lucy had heard whispers about such things before. Mail-order brides, they called them. Respectable women didn't talk about it openly, but everyone knew it happened. Women who had no other options would travel to distant territories to marry men they had never met. It had always seemed desperate and dangerous to Lucy, but now she wondered if desperate wasn't such a bad thing. One advertisement caught her eye. It was from a man in Colorado who ran a general store. He wrote simply, "Honest man seeks honest woman for companionship and partnership. Must be willing to work hard and start fresh. No past judgments here." The phrase, "no past judgments," made Lucy's heart skip a beat. She spent the rest of the day thinking about those words. No past judgments. Could there really be a place where her story wouldn't matter? Where she could be just Lucy, not the woman who couldn't have children or the divorced woman who brought shame to her family? But leaving everything behind felt terrifying. Lucy had never been more than 20 miles from her hometown. She knew every street, every face, every family story. The idea of traveling hundreds of miles to marry a stranger seemed impossible. That evening, Lucy walked past her old church. Through the windows, she could see the Wednesday night prayer meeting in progress. She had attended those meetings for years, sitting in the third pew with Robert, singing hymns and listening to testimonies. Now she wasn't welcome there anymore. As she stood outside in the cold, Lucy heard someone mention her name. Poor Lucy. A woman's voice said, "I heard she's been begging for a place to stay. It's so embarrassing for her family." Well, what did she expect? Another voice replied, "A woman who can't do her basic duty as a wife shouldn't be surprised when her husband leaves her." Lucy felt her face burn with shame and anger. These were women who had smiled at her for years, who had accepted her help during illness and difficult times. Now they spoke about her like she was a fallen woman who deserved her fate. That night, Lucy made a decision. She couldn't stay in a place where she would always be defined by what she couldn't do. She needed to go somewhere where she could start over, where her past wouldn't follow her around like a shadow. The next morning, Lucy went back to the train station. She studied the advertisements more carefully this time, reading each one several times. Some of the men sounded crude or demanding. Others seemed to be looking for servants rather than wives. But a few sounded kind, even lonely. There was a rancher in Wyoming who wrote about needing someone to help him build a life on the frontier. A shopkeeper in Kansas who said he was tired of eating his own cooking and wanted someone to share his small but comfortable home. And a farmer in Nebraska who admitted he was shy and hoped to find a woman who would be patient with him. Lucy realized that these men were probably as desperate as she was, just in different ways. They were alone on the frontier, working hard to build something, but missing the companionship that made life worth living. Maybe they wouldn't judge her for her past because they understood what it felt like to be alone. She spent her last few dollars on paper and ink and wrote 3 careful letters. In each one, she was completely honest about her situation. She told them about her divorce, about being childless, about having no family support. She figured that if they were going to reject her, it was better to know now than after she had traveled all that way. But she also wrote about her good qualities. She could cook and clean and manage a household. She was healthy and strong and willing to work hard. She had helped raise her younger brothers and sisters, so she understood about taking care of others. And she was loyal, maybe too loyal, since she had stayed faithful to Robert even when he had clearly lost interest in her. Lucy mailed the letters and waited. Every day she checked at the post office, hoping for a response. Meanwhile, she sold the last of her belongings to pay for a small room above the tavern. It wasn't respectable, but it was all she could afford. 3 weeks later, she received 2 responses. One was from the rancher in Wyoming, who seemed interested but asked a lot of questions about her ability to handle ranch life. The other was from the farmer in Nebraska, who wrote a kind letter saying he understood about fresh starts and would be honored to meet her. Lucy read both letters dozens of times. Either choice would mean leaving everything familiar behind and trusting her future to a stranger. But staying meant accepting a life where she would always be the town's failure. The woman who couldn't fulfill her purpose. She chose Nebraska. Something about the farmer's letter felt gentle and hopeful. He wrote about wanting to build a life together, not just needing someone to work for him. He offered to send money for her train ticket, saying he understood that starting over was expensive. As Lucy packed her single suitcase one more time, she felt scared but also excited. For the first time in months, she was moving toward something, instead of just running away from her problems. Maybe this stranger in Nebraska would give her the chance to discover who she really was, beyond the labels that had defined her for so long. The train to Nebraska would leave in the morning, carrying her toward a completely unknown future. Tom Wheeler had never planned to be a father, let alone a father to 3 children who weren't even his own. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And Tom's biggest curveball came in the form of a house fire that changed everything. His younger brother David and his wife Helen had been the golden couple of their small Nebraska farming community. They had 3 beautiful children, 9-year-old Katie, 6-year-old Ben, and 4-year-old little Rose. David worked the land next to Tom's farm, and their families spent every Sunday together, sharing meals and laughter. Tom had always been the quieter brother, the one who was better with animals than people. While David could charm anyone with his easy smile and quick wit, Tom preferred the company of his horses and cattle. At 34, he had never married, though not for lack of trying. The few women in their small town had always chosen more outgoing men, and Tom had accepted that he would probably live alone. Then came that terrible night in February. Tom woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of someone pounding on his door. His neighbor Pete was there, his face black with soot and his eyes wide with panic. "Tom, you need to come quick," Pete gasped. "David's house is on fire. The whole thing is going up." Tom threw on his clothes and ran through the cold night air toward the orange glow in the distance. By the time he got there, the house was completely engulfed in flames. The volunteer fire brigade was throwing bucket after bucket of water on the blaze, but it was too late. David and Helen had been trapped in their bedroom when the roof collapsed. The children had been in the kitchen when it happened, and Tom found them huddled together under a blanket, crying and calling for their parents. Katie, the oldest, had her arms wrapped around her younger siblings, trying to comfort them even though she was just a child herself. Tom knelt down beside them, his heart breaking as he looked into their frightened faces. "It's okay," he said softly, though nothing felt okay. "Uncle Tom is here now." In the weeks that followed, Tom discovered that being a parent was the hardest job in the world. The children were dealing with grief in different ways. Katie tried to be the little mother, taking care of Ben and Rose even though she was just 9 years old. Ben became angry and would throw tantrums over the smallest things. Little Rose would wake up screaming every night, calling for her mama. The women in town helped at first. Mrs. Johnson brought casseroles and watched the children when Tom had to work the farm. Old Mrs. Patterson taught Katie how to braid Rose's hair. But as the weeks turned into months, Tom realized that these kind neighbors had their own families to care for. He couldn't keep depending on their charity forever. Tom's daily routine became a nightmare of chaos. He would wake up at dawn to milk the cows and feed the animals, then rush back to the house to make breakfast for the children. Katie would help, as much as she could, but she was still just a little girl. Ben refused to eat most mornings, and Rose would cry if her eggs weren't cooked exactly right. Getting the children dressed and ready for school was another battle. Rose's hair never looked right no matter how hard Tom tried to brush it. Ben would disappear just when it was time to leave. Katie would quietly fix whatever Tom had messed up, but he could see the exhaustion in her young eyes. The hardest part was the evenings. After working the farm all day and dealing with 3 grieving children, Tom would collapse into his chair, completely drained. But the children needed baths and bedtime stories and someone to check for monsters under the bed. Tom did his best, but he felt like he was failing them every single day. One particularly difficult evening, Tom found Ben hiding in the barn, refusing to come in for supper. The boy was angry about something that had happened at school, and he was taking it out on everyone around him. "I hate it here," Ben shouted when Tom found him. "I want my mama and papa back." Tom's heart broke as he looked at his nephew's tear-stained face. "I know you do, son," he said quietly. "I miss them too." "You don't understand?" Ben said angrily. "You're not my papa? You don't know how to take care of us?" The words stung because they were true. Tom didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know how to comfort a crying child or help with homework or make Rose's favorite bedtime snack. He was trying his best, but it wasn't enough. That night, after finally getting all 3 children to bed, Tom sat at his kitchen table and faced the truth. The children needed more than he could give them. They needed a mother figure, someone who could provide the nurturing and stability that his rough cowboy hands simply couldn't offer. Tom had always been a practical man, and he approached this problem the same way he approached everything else, by looking for a practical solution. He had heard about men on the frontier who advertised for wives when they needed help with their households. It wasn't romantic, but it was honest. The idea made him uncomfortable at first. Tom had always imagined that if he ever got married, it would be for love. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about 3 children who needed a stable home and a woman's touch. He spent several evenings writing and rewriting his advertisement. He wanted to be completely honest about the situation. He wasn't looking for romance or passion. He was looking for someone who would care for his brother's children and help him create a real home for them. "Honest farmer seeks honest woman for companionship and partnership," he wrote. "Must be willing to work hard and start fresh. No past judgments here. 3 children in need of a mother's care." Tom read the advertisement dozens of times before, finally mailing it to newspapers in several eastern cities. He figured that women back east might be looking for fresh starts too, and maybe someone would be willing to take on the challenge of caring for 3 orphan children. While he waited for responses, Tom watched the children struggle with their daily lives. Katie was trying so hard to be grown up that she was missing out on being a kid. Ben's anger was getting worse, and he was starting to get into trouble at school. Rose was becoming more clingy and fearful, afraid that Tom might disappear too. The breaking point came when Tom found Katie crying in the barn after school. She had been trying to wash Rose's dress, but she had used too much soap and ruined it. The little girl was sobbing because she felt like she was failing at taking care of her siblings. "I'm sorry, Uncle Tom," Katie cried. "I'm not a good enough mama for them." Tom gathered the 9-year-old into his arms, feeling his heart break all over again. "Oh, honey," he said softly. "You're not supposed to be their mama. You're supposed to be their big sister." That night, Tom prayed harder than he had ever prayed before. He asked God to send someone who could love these children the way they deserved to be loved. Someone who could turn their house back into a home and give them the stability they desperately needed. 2 weeks later, Tom received a letter from a woman named Lucy. She wrote about being divorced and childless, about having no family support, about looking for a fresh start. But most importantly, she wrote about loving children and wanting to provide them with a stable, nurturing home. Tom read her letter 3 times, and something about her honesty touched him. She wasn't trying to pretend that she was perfect or that this would be easy. She was simply offering to try to give these children the care and attention they needed. Maybe, Tom thought, this could be the answer to his prayers. Maybe this stranger from back east could help him give Katie, Ben, and Rose the home they deserved. Lucy's hands shook as she held Tom's letter for the 10th time that morning. His words were simple but kind, and she could feel the desperation behind them. He had written about 3 children who needed a mother's care, about a farm that needed a woman's touch, and about his hope that they could build something good together. "I'm not looking for romance," he had written honestly. "I'm looking for a partner who can help me give these children the stable home they deserve. If you're willing to take on this challenge, I believe we can make it work." Lucy had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about his offer. The idea of caring for 3 grieving children felt both terrifying and wonderful. She had always wanted to be a mother, and here was a chance to mother 3 little ones who desperately needed someone to love them. She wrote back immediately, telling Tom she would come to Nebraska to meet him and the children. She was honest about her fears, but also about her excitement. "I may not be their real mother," she wrote, "but I promise to love them like they were my own." The train ride to Nebraska felt like the longest journey of Lucy's life. She had never been so far from home, and with each mile she felt more nervous. What if Tom didn't like her in person? What if the children rejected her? What if she wasn't strong enough for farm life? When the train finally pulled into the small station in Millbrook, Nebraska, Lucy's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She stepped off the train with her single suitcase, looking around for a man she had never seen before. Tom was easy to spot. He was tall and lean, with calloused hands and kind eyes. He was holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls, and 2 older children stood beside him, all 3 staring at Lucy with curious but cautious eyes. "Are you Lucy?" Tom asked, taking off his hat politely. "Yes," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you must be Tom." They stood there for a moment, 2 strangers who had agreed to build a life together. Lucy looked down at the 3 children, and her heart immediately went out to them. The little girl was clinging to Tom's hand, her big eyes wide with uncertainty. The boy looked angry and defiant, his arms crossed over his chest. The oldest child, a girl who looked to be about 9, was trying to appear brave, but Lucy could see the worry in her face. "Children," Tom said gently, "this is Lucy. She's come to meet us." The little girl buried her face in Tom's leg, suddenly shy. The boy just stared at Lucy with suspicious eyes. But the older girl stepped forward with remarkable maturity for her age. "Hello," she said politely. "I'm Katie. This is my brother Ben and my sister Rose." Lucy knelt down to Katie's level, her heart breaking at the seriousness in the young girl's face. "It's so nice to meet you, Katie. I've heard so much about you and your brother and sister." For the next hour, they sat in the small cafe near the train station, talking carefully about practical things. Tom explained about the farm, about the children's routines, about what life would be like if Lucy decided to stay. Lucy talked about her experience with children, about her willingness to work hard, about her hope that they could become a real family. The children listened to everything, occasionally whispering to each other, but mostly just watching Lucy with those careful, guarded eyes that children get when they've been hurt too much. "Can we go home now?" Little Rose finally asked, tugging on Tom's sleeve. "I'm tired." Tom looked at Lucy. "Would you like to see the farm? You can decide if this is really what you want." The ride to the farm was quiet except for the sound of the wagon wheels on the dirt road. Lucy sat beside Tom while the children huddled together in the back. She could feel them watching her, trying to figure out if she was someone they could trust. The farm was simple but well kept. The house was small and plain, but it looked sturdy and warm. Lucy could see a vegetable garden that needed tending and curtains in the windows that needed washing. It felt like a place where a family could be happy if they worked at it. "This is where we live," Tom said, helping Lucy down from the wagon. "It's not fancy, but it's home." Lucy looked around at the barn, the fields, the small chicken coop, and the house with its wraparound porch. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it. This was the kind of place she had always dreamed of having a family, inside. The house was clean but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The kitchen was functional but bare, the living room had furniture but no softness, and everything felt like it was just being used rather than lived in. "Rose and I share a room," Katie explained, showing Lucy around. "Ben has his own room and Uncle Tom sleeps in the big room." Lucy nodded, understanding that if she stayed, she and Tom would need to figure out sleeping arrangements. They had talked about this in their letters. This would be a marriage of convenience, not romance, at least at first. That evening, Lucy helped prepare dinner while Tom did the evening chores. She watched the children interact with their uncle, and she could see how much he loved them. But she could also see how exhausted he was, how he was trying to be everything to them but struggling to meet all their needs. Ben refused to eat his vegetables, and Tom looked like he was about to give up the fight. Rose spilled her milk and started crying, afraid she would get in trouble. Katie quietly tried to help with everything, acting more like a little mother than a 9-year-old girl. Lucy found herself naturally stepping in. She made a game out of eating vegetables with Ben, quickly cleaned up Rose's spilled milk without making a big deal about it, and gently encouraged Katie to just be a kid while the adults handled the grown-up things. After dinner, Tom put the children to bed while Lucy cleaned the kitchen. She could hear him reading a story to Rose, his deep voice soft and patient. She heard him talking quietly to Ben about something that had happened at school. She watched him help Katie with a torn dress, his big hands clumsy but careful with the delicate fabric. When Tom came back downstairs, he found Lucy sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap. "Well," he said, sitting down across from her. "What do you think?" Lucy looked around the kitchen, thinking about the children upstairs who needed so much love and care. She thought about Tom, who was trying so hard to be everything to them. She thought about her own empty life back east, where she had no purpose and no future. "I think," she said slowly, "that those children need a mother, and you need a partner, and I need a family." Tom nodded. "So you'll stay?" "I'll stay," Lucy said, "if you'll have me." They talked for another hour about practical things, how to handle the children's discipline, how to manage the household, how to make their unusual arrangement work. They agreed to be married quickly and quietly, just a simple ceremony with the children as witnesses. "I want you to know," Tom said as they prepared to say goodnight, "that I'm grateful you're here. I was at the end of my rope with those kids. They need someone who knows how to love them properly." Lucy smiled, feeling hopeful for the first time in months. "I think we're all exactly where we need to be," she said. As Lucy settled into the small guest room that night, she could hear the children's quiet breathing through the thin walls. Tomorrow, she would officially become their stepmother, and they would begin the long journey of becoming a real family. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, Lucy felt like she had a real purpose. She was finally home. The wedding ceremony was simple and quiet, held in the small church in Millbrook with just the pastor, Tom, Lucy, and the 3 children present. Lucy wore her best dress, a simple blue one that she had packed in her single suitcase. Tom had put on his only suit, the one he saved for special occasions. Katie, Ben, and Rose stood beside them, watching with serious faces as the pastor spoke about marriage and commitment. Lucy could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They had lost their parents just months ago, and now this stranger was promising to take care of them forever. When the pastor asked if Lucy would take Tom as her husband, she looked at the children before answering. "I do," she said clearly, and then added softly, "and I promise to love and care for these children as if they were my own." Little Rose reached for Lucy's hand during the ceremony, and Lucy felt tears in her eyes. Maybe this wasn't a traditional love story, but it was something beautiful in its own way. The first few weeks were harder than Lucy had expected. The children tested her constantly, trying to figure out if she was really going to stay or if she would disappear like their parents had. Ben was the most difficult, challenging every rule and ignoring most of her requests. One morning, he refused to get dressed for school and threw his clothes on the floor. "You're not my mother," he shouted at Lucy. "You can't tell me what to do." Lucy felt her heart break, but she kept her voice calm. "You're right, Ben. I'm not your mother, and I could never replace her. But I'm here now, and I care about you. Your real mother would want you to go to school and learn." It took patience and time, but slowly the children began to trust her. Lucy discovered that Katie had been carrying too much responsibility for a 9-year-old trying to be the family's little mother. Lucy gently encouraged her to just be a kid again, to play and laugh instead of worrying about everyone else. With Ben, Lucy learned that his anger was really grief and fear. He was scared that everyone he loved would leave him, so he pushed people away before they could hurt him. Lucy never gave up on him, even when he was difficult. She would sit with him when he had nightmares and help him with his schoolwork, showing him through actions that she wasn't going anywhere. Little Rose was the first to warm up to Lucy completely. She started calling her Mama Lucy and would run to her with scraped knees and hurt feelings. Lucy treasured these moments, finally feeling like the mother she had always dreamed of being. The breakthrough came about 3 months after the wedding. Lucy was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard crying from upstairs. She found Rose sitting on her bed, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Lucy asked, sitting down beside her. "I had a bad dream," Rose whispered. "I dreamed that you went away too, just like Mama and Papa did." Lucy gathered the little girl into her arms, her heart aching for this child who had lost so much. "Oh, honey, I'm not going anywhere. I'm your mama now, and I'm going to stay right here with you forever. Promise?" Rose asked, looking up at Lucy with those big, trusting eyes. "I promise," Lucy said, and she meant it with every fiber of her. Tom watched all of this happening from a distance, amazed at how Lucy had transformed their home. The house felt warm and lived in now, with flowers on the table and the smell of fresh bread in the kitchen. The children were laughing again, something he hadn't heard nearly enough of since their parents died, but more than that, Tom found himself falling in love with Lucy, not just because of what she did for the children, but because of who she was. She was strong and patient and kind, and she had brought light back into their dark world. One evening, after the children were in bed, Tom found Lucy on the porch, mending one of Ben's shirts. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Lucy looked peaceful in the golden light. "Thank you," Tom said quietly, sitting down beside her. "For what?" Lucy asked, looking up from her sewing. "For everything. For the children, for the home, for giving us all a second chance." Lucy smiled, feeling her heart flutter at the warmth in his voice. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a family when I thought I would never have one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Lucy realized that somewhere along the way, this arrangement had become something more. She had grown to love not just the children, but Tom as well. His quiet strength, his gentle way with the kids, his dedication to his family, all of it had captured her heart. "Lucy," Tom said finally, "I want you to know that this isn't just about convenience anymore. At least not for me." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've fallen in love with you," Tom said simply. "Really fallen in love. Not just because you're good with the children, but because you're wonderful. You're everything I never knew I was looking for." Lucy felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too, Tom. I didn't expect it to happen, but somewhere along the way, this became real for me too." Tom reached for her hand, and for the first time since their wedding day, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise for their future together. The turning point for their family came during the harvest season. Lucy had been with them for 6 months, and the children had fully accepted her as their mother. They worked together to bring in the crops, with even little Rose helping by carrying water to the workers. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Katie made an announcement. "I told my teacher today that my mamusi helped me with my arithmetic homework." Lucy felt her heart swell with joy. Katie had called her Mama without any qualifiers, just Mama. She was no longer the woman who had come to help. She was simply their mother. "And I told Billy Thompson that my mama makes the best apple pie in the county," Ben added, grinning at Lucy. "My mama reads me the best bedtime stories," Rose chimed. In not wanting to be left out, Tom looked around the table at his family, his wife, and the 3 children who had become their children, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. They had all found each other when they needed it most, and somehow they had created something beautiful together. As the months passed, Lucy continued to blossom as a mother and a wife. She learned to love the rhythm of farm life, the satisfaction of growing their own food, and the joy of being part of a community that accepted her completely. The women in town, who had initially been curious about the mail-order bride, came to respect her dedication to her family. One day, almost a year after Lucy had first arrived in Nebraska, she was hanging laundry on the line when she heard familiar laughter coming from the barn. She peeked inside to see Tom teaching Ben how to milk the cows while Katie and Rose played with the barn cats. This was her family, Lucy realized. Not the family she had once dreamed of, but the family she was meant to have. She had been cast out and rejected for being unable to have children, but she had found 3 children who needed her love just as much as she needed to give it. That evening, as she tucked Rose into bed, the little girl looked up at her with sleepy eyes and said, "Mama Lucy, I'm glad you came to take care of us." Lucy kissed her forehead softly. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. I'm exactly where I belong," and she was. After all the pain and rejection, Lucy had found her true home with Tom and the children. Sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into, but the ones you choose to love.